Hello, everyone. I am Borsika Rabin.
And I'm Rachel Tabak.
We are here today to provide you with a brief overview of conceptual models in D&I science and to discuss how to incorporate them into your research proposals for greater success. We are going to remove our pictures from the recording now and move on to our overview slide. I am going to start us off with the terminology and the importance of models and walk you through how to use logic models in preparation of selecting your D&I model, and also talk about where you can find models and what are some critical or helpful questions you could consider when selecting a model. Rachel will then take over and she's going to talk about what are some strategies that you can use to decide how to integrate models into your aims, innovation, and approach sections. So when we think about the term models, we are using it to describe collectively theories and frameworks. These two terms are, of course, different from each other. And the main difference is that theories, they provide a systematic way of understanding events or behaviors by providing an interrelated concept. So a good theory would provide a clear explanation of how and why specific relationships lead to a specific event. The theories are often classified in a continuum in terms of how abstract they are. There are grand theories, which are pretty open and can be used across different topics and themes. And then there are theories that are middle abstraction level or lower level abstraction. In the context of D&I, the theory of diffusion, or many of you would remember more diffusion of innovations, is an example of a D&I specific theory. There are other theories that we use in the field that are borrowed from organizational or economic fields and complexity science. Frameworks, compared to theories, are systematic ways to develop, manage, and evaluate interventions. They usually denote a structure, overview, outline, system, or plan, which consists of various descriptive categories like concepts, constructs, or variables. They do not provide explanation. They only describe empirical phenomena by fitting them into this set of categories. And most models that we use in D&I science fit this definition of frameworks. Finally, the term constructs will come up multiple times today. These indicate components or concepts or elements in your model, your intervention, implementation strategy, or the hypothesized outcomes that you are using. Why is it important for us to use D&I models? D&I models have the ability to facilitate your crafting of the D&I grant and enhance the D&I potential of your D&I study in multiple ways. They can provide you with guidance on how to refine and structure your research questions. They can help you with a structure for the development, management, and evaluation of your intervention or D&I efforts. They can make sure that you are including critical components of D&I strategies and help you also interpret your study findings, as well as suggest which measures to pick for your study and provide explanations why an intervention works or does not work. And this also applies to implementation strategies. When we look at the importance of frameworks and theories, we also like to go back. Enola Proctor and colleagues writing implementation research grant proposal 10 key ingredients paper, which highlights the role of conceptual models and theoretical justification as a critical component of a good D&I proposal. In fact, when you look at successful D&I proposals, you can see that the characteristics of the proposals include the inclusion and operationalization of D&I models, and unsuccessful, unfunded proposals often get a criticism of not identifying or using properly D&I models. The first step in thinking about the use of D&I models is what kind of elements or components are important in my study? And the way that we found useful to think about is to create some sort of diagram, roadmap, or a logic model in the more traditional definitions to guide your selection of D&I models. Logic models are basically a visual representation or picture of how your study does its work. As I mentioned earlier, they can be thought of as a roadmap. They provide a hypothesized description of the chain of causes and effects leading to an outcome. They include inputs and outputs and describes linkages between these two. And I like this quote: "The clarity of thinking that occurs from building this logic model is critical to the overall success of the program." This is our interpretation of a logic model in the context of implementation science in the sequences as the projects are happening. Very traditionally, there is obviously the starting conditions, inputs, proximal outcomes, and then the distal outcomes represented here. In the context of a D&I study, you first would define your problem, and then you would think about what intervention or policy would be appropriate to address that. How you are going to deliver it through an implementation strategy, what are the determinants, mechanisms, or mediators that might bring then you to this implementation and long-term outcomes. All this is happening obviously in a very dynamic context that changes across levels and time points, and in a sustainable system infrastructure and behaviors. And finally, obviously, we cannot ignore the importance of fit and adaptations in the context of interventions, implementation strategies, and the context. Here on this slide, I am showing you an example of the Diabetes Prevention Project. The Diabetes Prevention Program, DPP, is known by many of you. And if I would like to place this on the logic model, then I would start with the problem statement of alarming increase in incidence of type 2 diabetes and obesity is the problem. The actual evidence-based intervention that I would like to use is a group-based intervention, the Diabetes Prevention Program. And the implementation strategies, we usually have obviously multiple types of strategies, include cultural adaptation and fit, dose communication channels, and then an internet-based delivery to mobile phones, tablets, and computers. So here you would be identifying various types of strategies that you are intending to include. Then you might fit those different strategies with various types of mechanisms and mediators. In this case, we just highlighted engagement as a potential mechanism or mediator that will lead to various types of outcomes. In case of this study, implementation outcomes, we identified increased reach of the program participants, as well as decreased cost and resources needed to deliver the program. And then in the long run, hopefully we will be able to decrease weight, decrease diabetes incidence, and increase physical activity. You also can be a little bit more specific in terms of what your dynamic context looks like and what are some important sustainable system infrastructure components that you would like to consider. Once you have a logic model, it is a little bit easier to move into the stage of broadly considering multiple models. So I'm going to talk briefly about how you would go about choosing models. First of all, it is not always easy. There are, of course, very easy ways of choosing a model that you know and then stopping there. But the ideal way to go about it is to consider the broad range of models that are available in dissemination and implementation science. And as you can see on this visual and some of the publication screenshots behind, we have a lot of D&I models. In fact, Rachel and colleagues identified 61 models in their early systematic review in 2012. Additional models were added from various sub-areas. And then when we look at a more recent review of the literature through sampling of colleagues in the dissemination implementation science and their model use, and then also the knowledge translation models, we are really up to 150 plus, edging toward 200 different kind of models that you could be considering. Some of them are broader, others are very specific, but they are nevertheless available to you. So I am sure that those of you who have not worked a lot with D&I models might ask the question, so which one should I use? And today we are not getting into the details of specific models. We don't have time for that, but I did highlight here a few of the common models, not by any means the only models that are appropriate. I will just briefly show you on the top left corner, the EPIS model. In the middle is PRISM. On the right side, it's REAIM with contextual expansions. On the lower corner, you can see the Tricia Greenall's model that is very comprehensive. And then on the right lower corner is the CIFAR model. So these are all different models that you can consider. And then obviously the additional 140 some. So what do you do? How do you decide which one would work for you? First of all, I love this quote. It has been emerging in the field and we don't exactly know who initiated it. I perhaps should put an unknown contribution there. But basically it says that theories are like toothbrushes. Everyone has one and no one wants to use anyone else's. So one suggestion would be not to create a new model if at all possible. There are many models and there are many values to using existing models for your work, including the resources, tools that are available for you to operationalize those models, potentially linked measures, and your ability to contribute to implementation science by refining those models to your study. Especially if you are newer to the field, I think tapping into existing models is very important. And then in terms of searching these and identifying, we started a website a few years back. Rachel and I are both involved with the development of it. It was based on Rachel's original paper, and then we expanded it. So now we have close to 100 or 100 plus models included. And we will be using some of these sections from the website to guide you through the next few steps. But in the select section of the website, you can actually search the D&I models using their constructs and identifying some characteristics and get a list of models that meet that criteria. Your logic model will help you hopefully fill out the search criteria. It will hint some of the important constructs that you use. And then once you have that list of models, you might still get a list of 5, 10 models. Then these are some questions that we found useful to consider. What is my research question? So will the model fit well with that research question? What is the scope of my study? Some models are more appropriate for different levels, multi-level thinking in the study. What is the, I apologize, I have a little bit of a problem here. What is the purpose of the model in my study? So is it going to be providing us guidance on how to build an intervention? Is it helping us with understanding how the implementation processes are happening, or is it more of an evaluative purpose? What are some key constructs and levels that need to be included? Again, the logic model hopefully will help you there. And this is also true for the sociological levels that are relevant for you. Models generally, these D&I models generally include multiple levels. It's a very desirable characteristic of a D&I model. And then in some cases, you might decide that a single model is just not enough for your study. There are studies where you start with adapting an intervention and then moving into testing it. There are some models that are really well fitted for adapting interventions like the IM-ADAPT or the ADAPT-IT. Other models will be more appropriate on the other end to think about planning and evaluation of the actual models. So I have recently been working with a junior faculty here, thinking through whether the combination of IM-ADAPT and the REAIM framework would be a good combination for her particular proposal. And then often the models, once you have them chosen and 1 or 2, generally you don't want to go beyond that, you need to adapt them. You also want to think about measures, whether they are available for your particular model, and that can be a deal breaker on choosing a model. And then are there good examples, and especially in your area, your setting, are there good examples of how this model has been used? So at this point, I'm going to hand this over to Rachel. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Borsika. And I'll continue us on talking about using the model you selected in your study. You can use a D&I model throughout your study, and in particular for this course, your entire grant proposal. The earliest part of a model is often used when your grant is being written, and you can carry that through all the way to carrying out your study and reporting your study findings. Models are used to guide research and help researchers interpret findings and contribute to the science. Your model should be apparent, therefore, in your design of your study, your aims, the activities you describe, selection of measures, evaluation, analysis, and then in the interpretation and dissemination of your findings. Because of that, it's crucial to introduce your model early in your grant application, generally on the aims page. In this presentation, I'll focus on ways to use your model in the aims, innovation, and approach sections. Just to preface that with a few common limitations that reviewers cite or that we may have seen in our own summary sheets to model use in a study. A common limitation of a grant application is that a model is mentioned in one section, but is not fully integrated across all parts of the proposal. So you might see an example where the aims page indicates a framework will be used, but then nothing is described in the approach section about how. Another example is when a model is not integrated across the proposal. What this looks like is a model is mentioned in the proposal, but then there's sample items for an interview guide provided in the approach, and it's not clear how these items are informed by that model or its constructs. A final common limitation that reviewers cite is that they perceive that you have selected the wrong model for your study. So we see this sometimes with models that have been categorized a certain way, that they can only be used for certain functions. So for example, REAIM is sometimes thought to only inform study evaluation. To get around this, it can help reviewers if you're very explicit about how you're using a model, demonstrating its appropriateness. In the case of REAIM, this would involve emphasizing its incorporation of inner and outer context. Using a figure and citing examples of this use can also help. So let's look specifically at the first place for your model to appear and how it can guide your study, and that's the aims. On this first page, you can describe how the selected model helps in shaping your aims, research questions, and/or hypotheses. For example, is there a previous literature showing use of your model that will help in developing the rationale for your study? Are there hypothesized relationships that can be empirically tested in your study? Are there parts of a model, particularly things like contextual variables, that have been used in one or more previous studies and places where gaps still remain? I pulled an example from the NCI Grants Library of a successfully funded study. It's apparent from the aims page how this model helps address an identified gap in theory-driven, stakeholder-informed approaches to de-implementation strategies. This carries through to the aims, which use a framework, in this case, the theoretical domains framework, to identify barriers and facilitators, and apply the findings along with stakeholder preferences to tailor de-implementation strategies. There are several ways the model can add to your study's innovation. Does adaptation and/or use of that model advance D&I science? And if so, how? The D&I contribution could be adaptation and empirical use in and of itself. Are you using innovative methods to adapt and use your model? This might involve engaging a new set of stakeholders to apply your model. Borsika talked a bit about adaptation, and from a research perspective, as long as model adaptations do not become a weakness of the proposed study, like making drastic changes to the model, it provides an excellent opportunity for model testing and application. Are you using a model from a field different from your own? For example, taking a model from business or engineering and applying it to a health issue. This is also a way to add innovation to your study. Are you applying a model from D&I science to advance a substantive or content area? Even if your model application does not substantially advance D&I science, it may advance your substantive or content area. Thinking about these innovation components, it's important to consider the study section that you're targeting. A D&I focused study section will likely be interested in the first three types of innovation, whereas a study section from your substantive area may find that final bullet more salient. We can see this carry through in the example from earlier, where the proposal highlights the potential for advancing implementation science, which is added by use of the theoretical domains framework to link behavior change techniques. This allows for us to map causal relationships to professional behavior change, advancing D&I science. The place in your proposal that a model is perhaps most expected to be evident is the approach, and in particular, to be tied to the ways the model has been described elsewhere in the application. Thinking back to the limitations, a particularly problematic one is when the model is mentioned in the aims or significance section, but is not evident in that approach section. So it's important to think about how the model is informing your study methods. Is it linked to the constructs you're measuring? Things like context, determinants, implementation, or client outcomes? And if so, how? Are you using mixed methods? And if so, how do these methods map to your D&I model? Do your analyses assess relationships postulated in your model and highlighted on your aims page? So for example, how does your model inform the relationships between contextual variables, D&I strategies, and outcomes? Regardless of your study focus, so that could be a D&I study or any other type of proposal, a grant is stronger when it's clear how the methods accomplish the aims, answer the research question, and test the hypotheses. A model can help knit these together and can often be demonstrated more explicitly through tables and figures, and I do have a bit of an example below. Thinking about ways the model can be used in the approach, recent work has tried to support methods to tie barriers and facilitators, such as those assessed by the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, to implementation strategy selection. Another example is applying the theoretical domains framework and using theory-informed approaches to identify determinants of behaviors and develop implementation interventions. These are important ways the model can inform that approach. Another way a model is often operationalized, as Borsika mentioned, is in a study measure. Reviewers often note limitations when study measures do not seem to be informed by a model, especially if a model had previously been mentioned in the proposal. So this is the same website Borsika showed. Thinking again about that select section, you can click in that section to identify a model to dig into. So in this case, I just picked the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research just as a visual. Each model has its own page, and so you could find a page like this for many other models. And on that page are a list of the model constructs. You can click on any of the constructs that you're interested in including in your study and get very detailed information about that construct. Digging down on that page, you have to scroll a little, you can find links to the measures, to resources that have measures. In this case, we're linking to the GEM website, but we hope to have other links as well, and that can take you to a place where you can find measures to assess the model constructs. In addition to helping you identify specific measures, the model can inform your data collection and analysis methods. You can see in this same sample grant how the model is informing the development of the interview guides and helping ensure the interviews accomplish the study aims by focusing the questions on relevant domains. The model is further used to guide analysis and interpretation of the findings by helping with coding and then organizing themes. One way to help clarify and demonstrate how a model is informing a study in a grant or also a paper is through tables and figures. I included a blank table here just as a template or a way to start thinking about it, with some possible column headings where you could list a row for each construct that you want to include. This table suggests providing the construct definition you're using, what measure you'll be using to assess the construct, at what levels it will be assessed, so for example, provider, clinic, patient, and the method or methods you'll use to collect the data. So will you use qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods? I've also included a few examples which show different ways to display this. In addition to tables, figures can also be helpful in describing how a model is used in the study. Recreating a published figure and adapting it to fit your own study can help show constructs and relationships. We hope that this is a useful description of models and D&I grants and welcome you to spend some time looking at our searchable website.